Last time on this channel, we took a look at Valkyrie No Boken, Namco's second original game for Nintendo's family computer system, released in Japan way back in 1986. An action-adventure featuring a feather-capped female protagonist that I enjoyed quite a bit, despite some of its annoying, antiquated idiosyncrasies and unpleasant design decisions in the latter regions. Today, I'll be reviewing the next official entry in the short-lived series and exploring the majority of its variants, from the arcade original to the PC Engine home port. This is Valkyrie No Densetsu. Valkyrie No Densetsu was created by the same character designer as the first entry. Hiroshi Fuji had worked for Namco's design department for years in the toy division, before he was given the title of head designer on this project. Initially, he had planned this sequel to be an open-world adventure game, but the restrictive verticality of arcade monitors at the time forced him to scrap those plans. The final product would end up being a much more linear experience, with a heavier emphasis on action than its predecessor. That plays a lot more like a shooter. This is quite the shakeup, but admittedly, it makes for an objectively better game in almost every way. I like the original quite a bit, but I think the common consensus when it came to that one was that it could be a tad too unforgiving and needlessly challenging in the final stretch. Valkyrie No Densetsu's straightforward combat and linearity just seems like it fits into Namco's wheelhouse a bit better. It's a much more streamlined experience that eliminates all of the grinding. The stats-based leveling up system is gone entirely, as are all of the RPG-like mechanics. The game kicks off with an impressive looking cutscene with some really nice, clean, colorful artwork, and some excellent scaling effects. Valkyrie No Densetsu takes place after the events of No Boken. Peace has been restored across Marvel Land, but the inhabitants of Zandraland have begun to notice that their kingdom has been stripped of its resources. Many characters from the original adventure reappear in this second outing, including this gummy-looking thing called a Zandra, who is now a playable protagonist in co-op mode. Zul, a former bandit, also joins the crew in a background role, as does Sabina, a member of the Agilic Kwakumen tribe. Together, you and your friends set out on a journey to stop the evil Camus in order to reclaim a magical MacGuffin called the Golden Seed. All of the narrative is displayed in between stages in Japanese, but similarly to Valkyrie's first adventure, it's pretty easy to make out what's going on. The arcade and PC Engine versions aren't translated to English, but there's a reworked port available on the 5th volume of Namco Museum, a series of compilations created for the Sony PlayStation back in the mid-90s. There are also fan-made patches for all of the games, including the Famicom original, so there are enough ways of working around the language barrier for those of you who prefer reading everything in English. Personally, I don't have a problem with not understanding the intricacies of the story, but there certainly are options out there for those of you who do. Valkyrie now resembles the likeness shown on the box and throughout the cutscenes. Instead of having black hair, she now sports a blonde do. All of the in-game characters look really good with some nice sprite details as well as smooth animations. This time around, her sword fires out a projectile, which makes it easy to hit enemies from a distance. The Xandra character wields a trident, but the differences between the two heroes' weapons are merely aesthetic, as they both control the exact same. Initially, the game was to feature 4 identical Valkyries in the simultaneous multiplayer, but this would later be scrapped and whittled down to the 2-player co-op option, seen here. The primary stock firepower leaves a bit to be desired when it comes to strength and range, but upgrades can be accumulated throughout from enemy carcasses, as well as in shops scattered across the land. Unfortunately, these power-ups run out of juice after a while, which feels quite unfair. What's worse is that there isn't a meter or any sort of indication that they are running out of energy, so you'll often be caught with your pants down during the many frantic skirmishes. This is single-handedly my biggest gripe with the game with a bullet. Both characters have a life bar, which is good, but why wouldn't they have programmed this thing like a shooter where your upgrades disappear upon death, instead of this arbitrary depletion system? Some might not find it too bad since you can kind of stack your firepower so that another one will activate immediately after one runs out, but it still irks me. Like, I'll be having a great run with a good groove going on and then boom! My projectiles change without warning. Maybe it's just me, but it really ruins the rhythm of the game. Along with these upgrades, you'll come across some NPCs who cough up magic spells. These come in a variety of forms, including one that summons little mini Valkyries, who work alongside your hero of choice as options. It's a really cool effect that can be used multiple times, resulting in a small army of mini heroines. Another special expands the size of the protagonist into a giant with jumps that cause screen-rumbling earthquakes. Never ask a woman how much she weighs. There are a few more, including a dizzying tornado move that is pretty fun to use, even though it sometimes forced me to get caught up inside walls and doorways. Plus, of course, we have a pretty standard screen wipe to round it all out. All of these are great additions and help to even out the score exponentially against the droves of baddies and their seemingly endless waves of projectiles. There are a lot of tricky platforming sequences, but the jumping feels super tight and forgiving. Altering your trajectory in mid-air is pretty easy to pull off, and there's always a shadow under your character, so landing safely shouldn't be too much of an issue. Most of the level design is pretty fair, and if you fall into a chasm, the game will generously spat you out on the last chunk of stable ground you were on, and steal a bit of your life as a penalty. The majority of these sequences are very forgiving, but there is one particular section near the end that is just flat out poorly designed and cruel. Honestly, I really dread this final pit area in the game, and it often results in me nearly quitting the entire thing. There are clouds that zap you with lightning while the Wicked Witch's shit-ass monkey rejects rain terror on you from above. The person who designed this should not be allowed anywhere near development for video games ever, and wow, look at me. Big tough guy trash talking a developer from the late 80s, but still, this entire area can go straight to hell. While I'm having an anger-induced aneurysm over here, these lightning-fast blue fluffs can eat a big ol' sack of rot as far as I'm concerned. They move way too quickly and get right up on you with little to no warning and become a real nuisance after a while. Anyway, while you were listening to me having a mini meltdown just there, you might have noticed that all of these platforming sections look really nice. I mentioned it before, but it can't be said enough. The scaling effects in this game are remarkable. Off the top of my head, I can't think of an experience from this era that matches this level of presentation. Valkyrie will drop into new stages below, sprites will often grow in size, and there's even a gigantic boss to fight that forces the screen to zoom out due to how large it is. It's bananas and really impressive. One of my favorite moments has you exploring a castle fortress with working catapults that spring you into the air, making the entire set piece visible from above. It's just a gorgeous looking game. Valkyrie No Densetsu may lean heavily into the action realm, but it does still retain some of the adventure qualities from its predecessor. Each stage has its fair share of branching paths, and hidden rooms housing a variety of NPCs. Most of the areas loop back around, but it's worth your time to fully explore each region thoroughly to earn permanent health upgrades, magic, and other helpful goodies. The majority of the enemies from the Famicom original make their return, and they still drop currency to spend at shops. There are quite a few mini-bosses, including this double-headed thing from the first game, but they tend to get a bit repetitive as you mostly come up against the same ones over and over. All of the big bads look really good and sport some cool effects, but there just aren't enough of them for my money. Hiroyuki Kawada returns once again as the composer, and this is just a really great soundtrack from top to bottom, with a lot more variety all around. The main theme is catchy and memorable, but my personal favorites are the moodier numbers that play within the game's more cavernous regions. It's a superb collection of music, and the quality of the audio is amazing. It's hands down one of the best things about the entire experience. A little over a year after the release of this game, the PC Engine would receive a port that remains largely faithful, both visually as well as mechanically. This version was my introduction to Valkyrie No Densetsu, as my local arcades didn't have the original available to play. There are a few differences between the two, but most of the alterations make this a much more enjoyable experience for console gamers. Firstly, and most noticeably, the scaling effects have taken a clearly obvious hit, which is understandable. It's certainly a downgrade graphically, but Namco's development team did an excellent job retaining all of the qualities of the original that mattered. The majority of the stages are translated very well, with a few additions and tweaks that make it feel a bit more like a larger, more complex experience overall. In the arcade version, there are a couple of moments where the player needs to solve a riddle or choose an option through text dialogue. This PC Engine port includes a few more of these, which makes it a bit tougher to play without knowledge of the language, so you might find that a patch is necessary for this one. Though the penalty isn't all that punishing, since answering incorrectly just pushes you back and forces you to replay certain areas. From what I can tell, the choices get swapped around too, preventing you from just memorizing the kanji patterns. I've never had much trouble with them, but I can see how they could be troublesome if you continuously choose poorly. 2-player co-op option has been removed entirely, which kinda sucks, but a password feature has been added, though the game isn't very long, so it largely feels like an unnecessary inclusion. A lot of the magic spells have been altered or eliminated entirely. Instead of having the option to summon many mini Valkyries, your protagonist now clones herself, which basically results in a slightly more limited offensive buff. The amount of enemies on screen has been decreased substantially, and you'll no longer be able to continue on the spot. You can pick up a few extra lives along the way, and these will drop you in the same place that you died, but they are pretty rare. Experienced players should have no problem collecting them, as they do stack up if you don't perish frequently. A new boss has been added to the end of the game, which is good, but it would have been nice if Namco had expanded on this even more with a few others. The rearranged stages and new items make it a worthwhile experience, but at its core, it's very much a straight-up conversion of the arcade game, for better or for worse. The music is almost as good as the coin-up original. I have a tremendous amount of appreciation for the PC Engine's sound hardware, and I think a lot of these tracks come out sounding very crisp and clean, despite the limitations. The arcade version's audio is definitely better, but this console alternative is no slouch. This U-Card was released at a time where the PC Engine was pumping out quality arcade ports on a regular basis, and Valkyrie No Densetsu is simply one of the best from the era. The absence of the 2-player mode kinda sucks, but it's certainly not a deal-breaker by any means. All in all, this thing is better balanced, with a reasonable difficulty curve and a lot less frustrating, cheap deaths. Visually, the coin-up original is the clear winner, but this one's certainly an admirable effort that I think I might prefer playing just a bit more. Between 1995 and 1998, 6 compilations of Namco properties were released for the Sony PlayStation, with Volume 5 including a fully translated version of Valkyrie No Densetsu. This is largely the exact same game as the arcade release, with a few bells, whistles, and twists added. The HUD has now been moved to the side of the screen, which frees up some real estate, but everything else mostly remains the same. Perhaps the most interesting feature in this collection is the inclusion of a 3D world, where you can wander about and learn a bit about the game itself, as well as some lore bits. Honestly, I'd recommend this entire collection of Namco Museum titles on the PlayStation for anyone who's a fan of the company. They are robust compilations with a lot of little extras tossed in, and well worth a few bucks if you can find them out in the wild. A lot of this stuff can be purchased digitally through a variety of different official sources, which is pretty convenient. It's a bit sad that this series of Valkyrie titles kind of died off, but there are a few spin-offs and she has occasionally made guest appearances in other games over the years. Personally, I'm a big fan of this short-lived series. If I had to rank them all, I'd put Valkyrie no Boken at the top. It has its fair share of problems and can be quite frustrating at times, but ultimately, I just appreciate how ambitious and different the entire thing is. When it comes to these different versions of Valkyrie no Densetsu, I'd recommend the PC Engine one over the other two, followed by the PlayStation port, and finally the arcade original. Either way, you can't really go wrong with any of them. They're all solid action-adventure games that really deserve a lot more love and attention.